how I first heard about the camp. Well, I had come to Ithaca, to Cornell, to a graduate program at Cornell, beginning in '87, in the fall of '87. I don't remember who I first heard about the Peace Camp from, but I was living with other lesbians in town, and I met some other lesbians on campus, and I remember hearing about it, that there was this place, it was not far away, it was this like women's community, it was, I don't remember I really don't remember. I do remember who first brought me, or who, and her name was Beth Fishman, and she was an undergraduate student. I'm not even sure I remember exactly how I met her, because she wasn't like one of the students in my classes. But I think she was friends with some women I was meeting through classes, and part of a group of friends. And she was talking a lot about the Peace Camp. I think in no small part because she had a wicked crush on Sarah. Somebody had brought her there, and she was jazzed by the energy and the experience, and so she was talking about it a lot. And my curiosity was piqued, and I thought it was interesting, and so I was interested in going. But I didn't actually get there until the summer of '88. And I went with her. I had the car, she knew the way, and that's when we first went. I had not been out as a lesbian for very long. I had been something of a feminist since my high school, years, and in college, but certainly not radical, but definitely feminist. And I had come out around '85 or so, summer of '85. It was a process, but I'd say it started around then. And I don't know. She was very excited about it, and the women were so interesting and cool, and there's so many, and there's so much happening, and it was so nearby, and I was really embroiled in being a graduate student during the academic year, and during the summer it was kind of, well, it's beautiful there in the summer. I mean, it's beautiful, and most of the students go away, so I think it's just a beautiful place to be in the summer. And she said, and they go swimming in the lake, and they hang out around the campfire. All of this was very appealing to me. And, I'm also a musician. I play guitar, and I like singing around campfires. So, that was, I'm sure that was part of the appeal. I didn't have knowledge of the history, of the origins, of the politics. I knew nothing about '83. I mean, I was vague, I knew there were people who were opposed to nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, and I knew about that, and but I didn't know anything about it when I first went up there. I was fascinated. I was kind of fascinated. I had been I grew up in this, kind of upper middle class environment. I had been in college and with other college students, and I had been, I started to get, I'm trying to weave some things together. When I left college, I moved to Boston, and I lived in a big kind of collective house in Allston for a little while, and one of my, there were a couple of housemates. There was like 8 people in this house, and a couple of them were lesbians, and one of them, was like, just after I had moved in, she was like, I'm going to Michigan, me and my friends, who want to come? And I'm like, looking for work and all of this stuff, and I thought, well, I might as well, because once I get a job, I won't be able to go do something like that. So, I was introduced to like Michigan women's culture, women's music, like that. So I think in retrospect, probably part of the pull was seeing it as kind of connected to that kind of energy. Michigan was huge. I mean, you know, physically, spiritually, emotionally, experientially. You know, I was had dealt with a long history of body hatred and like having been forced to diet and, you know, being told I was fat and all this. Of course, I was like half the size I am now, but still, it was very real to me at the time. It's the light like messing with my face.
What you were noticing?
Yeah. So you know, so being at Michigan was a big deal. You know, and people said, "Oh, women run around naked all the time at Michigan," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to do that." But like the experience of being there and seeing all different kinds of women and all different kinds of bodies and all different ages and shapes and scars and, you know, imperfections and perfections and whatever the hell that means. You know, I was brave enough to like go without my shirt and I mean, it really started a process for me. It was part of the early parts of process for me of like making different decisions about how I was going to be in relationship with my own body. But, you know, I think that I probably got the message that the peace camp was the same culture, you know, the same part of the same culture. And that was appealing to me. And I had been at Michigan summer of 86 and summer of 87. Yeah, so I had been there twice by the time that I got up to the peace camp. I was probably just up for the day the first time. I mean, I lived in Ithaca, so it was 45 minutes away. And, you know, it was like, well, just go visit, you'll see if you like it kind of thing. Of course I liked it. I fell in love with it immediately. I think that I began to learn through listening to the stories and meeting the women and like learning about the history of the place. I began to learn about the spirit of it and the politics of it and the herstory. But I didn't know any of that when I first went. But the experiences were so engaging. The stories, the variety of women who were there. I mean, I was saying I had been a pretty sheltered person, you know, and I had I hadn't really had much interaction with, like, for instance, with working class women. I mean, I went to a, you know, elite college and was with other mostly upper middle class young people like myself, and you know, then I was at Cornell and I was with similar kinds of people, and very much, you know, kind of life of the mind and kind of heading in professional careers, and that was definitely the path that had been laid out for me, and I was trying to find my way along that path. And this introduced me to it opened a door to a whole nother world, and a whole nother range of experiences and different kinds of women, and with really different life stories from my own. And I really had to start learning about differences and about other women's experiences. And you know, it's a gradual process. You know, you kind of think the world you live in is the world that is, until you get a glimpse of other worlds. And you're in a place to be able to see them. Like, you know, you have to be able to see them. But yeah, I think that was very much part of it, and also just women are beautiful, you know, and exciting and funny and talented and just, yeah, I mean, all of that. Of course, the land itself was beautiful. It was nice to get out of town and out into the countryside, and who doesn't love sitting around a campfire, and all of that, you know, all of that was part of it. But and you know, the reality piece of it, the concrete piece of it was I had a car. And I lived in Ithaca, and there were often women who needed transportation back to the bus station, up from the bus station, you know, people got rides with friends as far as Ithaca because they were visiting some friend in college or something like that, and then they needed a ride up. So I was really the shuttle that first summer. And as I was doing that, I got to meet all of these different women. I do remember that, because it's part of the story of my name, that a woman was there whose name was Amber. She was from Canada. She was significantly older than me. I'd say at the time she was probably in her 50s, maybe 40s. I don't know. I was really young. I was like 23, you know, so I didn't have a good sense of that at all. I don't know. Yeah, maybe she was in her 40s. But at any rate, she was really into, you know, the idea of peace camp names, and that women should have peace camp names. So at the time, lots of women were kind of toying with different names. It didn't happen all at once, but I was kind of toying with that idea during that summer. And but she had a way of, like, if a woman like said, maybe this is good, she would like latch onto it and call that woman that thing until it stuck. And she would like make sure that everyone, like, she would say, oh no, that's not Kathy, that's Rhiannon, you know. And she would like insist. And so she was a big part of making the name Otter stick at first. But then once it's there and then you get introduced as Otter, then you become known as Otter, and then you're Otter for the rest of your life. And why Otter? I remember at the time I was, you know, as we all were, kind of reading all sorts of stuff about native spirituality, and there was this book, this Sun Bear book about the medicine wheel, astrology, and I remember that the description of the otter totem was very accurate of me. And so then I was kind of thinking about it. Then I also realized, well, I do love the water. I love swimming and playing in the water. And then then otters have such a playful spirit, and I still do to some extent, but I really did at the time, and I really didn't want to be working. I wanted to be playing all the time, and that was part of what kept bringing me up to the peace camp. So it was right. It stuck. It really stuck. So that's how I got the name Otter. It's hard to describe. Sometimes it's hard to explain that to other people because, you know, here in the other world, in another world where I live, and I usually just say it's, you know, because like people think it's some kind of deep spirit name. You know, it's a nickname that stuck. I don't think of it as like a soul name or like some kind of grand import. It's a name. It's a name. And for a long time, I had a long braided tail. And I have the whiskers and the tail. And this is how we would tell people, like, people would always get me and Elliot mixed up. Here, not there, not at the peace camp, but later, in later years here. And they were like, oh, I can never keep straight. Which one is this? Like whiskers, tail, Otter. It's easy. But you know what? Actually, I'm going to go on a tangent now. The thing about the whiskers. I mean, this just happened as part of how my body decided to be. And in fact, there's a lot more growth that I could cultivate if I wanted to, but I can only deal with but so much shit in the world, you know. But the reason that I decided to keep this originally, and it's still part of it, is there was a woman that came to the peace camp. Her name was Sharon. She was from England, and she had quite a goatee, just like this, the two kind of patches. It was pretty long too, as I recall, and it was my first. It was the first time I had met a woman who chose to keep that, and it struck me as so brave and so. Well, first of all, I thought it looked cool, but like on her at the time, I didn't have very much, but I was starting to get little whiskers, and I was really ambivalent about it, and I didn't know what, you know, like, is there something wrong, and should I shave it or should I dye it, or, you know, like all the things that you're supposed to do to facial hair. And then she was just growing hers. And I'm like, well, yeah, because like this is just part of how women's bodies are. And I don't have to be ashamed of it and make it go away. I could choose to make it go away, but I don't have to make it go away. So I allowed it to grow, and I continued to allow it to grow, and I've continued to allow it to grow ever since. I mean, since then I've met many other women, not a huge number of other women, but some, and you know, what's the thing about being a woman who grows hair on her face, that women come and talk to you about it, and gee, I have that, but I shave it, or I didn't know, and I didn't, you know, women have all sorts of ambivalence about it, because it's one of the hallmarks of masculinity in our culture. I mean, with all the trans stuff going on now, what's the first thing that, you know, women who are trying to become men do is they want facial hair, because that signifies masculinity. So one of the things for me that it's about is, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. In fact, I have this wish that we could, like, you know, in my fantasy world, that we could have like a year where all women just let grow whatever grew. You know, just so that we could really see the real diversity of women's faces. But that's a fantasy. Anyway, but we can go back to the peace camp. But this is part of like how that peace camp things live on in my life. The exposure to women making conscious choices to accept themselves as how they are, and that you can do that even when the society says this is not how women are supposed to be.
Were there a lot of women on the land when you were there?
When I was there, yeah. Summer of '88 was pretty busy. There were a lot of women coming and going. I mean, I would say there was, at any given time, there was often as many as 20 women on the land. But there was a lot of coming and going. So over the whole summer, it was like a place that women would stop and spend time on their way to other places. There was kind of like a nomadic culture that would go from festival to festival, and they'd stop and spend time, or women would come just to spend time at the camp. There were a lot of, it seemed to me that there were a lot of women through there that summer. That was part of what was exciting about it, is you never knew who was going to be there or not. I mean, you just never knew, and it was always something different. There was always some new story, somebody new to learn from, somebody new to meet. Partly because of my own naivete, I wasn't as clued into that first summer. But as I learned more about the camp and what it really was about, I became more aware of that, and I became more connected to that. But for real, the first summer I was there, a big part of it for me was social. I mean, not just like surface social, but really about connecting and with women, and the camaraderie, and it was fun. It was fun. You know, I mean, you work together and you get tired together, and then you go naked into the lake together. I mean, it was fun. It was really, and I was about playing at that time. I mean, I wasn't really seriously into the work of it till later.
But you could play anywhere, and you were
not like that.
What is that? Was it because it was women's community?
It was because it was women's space, not just women's community. There was women's community in Ithaca, and plenty of it. There were lots and lots of women, and lots of lesbians, and lots of that funky, lefty, groovy stuff in Ithaca, which I also loved. I loved Ithaca. It was a great place to live. But it was women's space. It was women-only space. It was assertively women-affirming, women-loving space, which is not the same as just hanging out with other women in town. Very big. I didn't have any knowledge of the military stuff. It seemed like the fence went on forever. Buildings that were behind it seemed very sterile, and it had that big sign out front about dedicated to quality or something, or maybe that was later. I don't remember. It said that later. I don't remember what it said before. I don't remember what it said before. Well, one time, pretty late on, we did a little bitty action where we just put an E in front of the quality. And it took them weeks to figure that out. I didn't know so much about the depot. Like, we were going to the peace camp. It was a woman's place in my mind at the time. I didn't think of it as associated with the depot per se until I learned why it was there. Like, why it was there. And Beth might have told me some of that, but I mean, you kind of get it at different levels. And I didn't fully get it until I had a chance to kind of
and that process of finding out about it, how did that happen? What were some of the ways?
Just talking, just like this, like we do, like hearing stories. Hearing stories. Who are you? Where are you from? How do you come to be here? Well, I was here in '83. Well, tell me about what it was like, Or actually, not so much tell me about what it's like. It was like, oh, I remember when, blah, blah, blah. Were you there when, do you remember so-and-so? What was her name? Mountain? Oh, yeah. Mountain, trout, hawk, shad, thundercloud, twilight, bird, wolf.
Otter's good at this game.
We sat around making up joke names at one point, and then there was some. It wasn't just the peace camp that did this. This was a phase at the time in like lesbian culture. And I remember there was a postcard that I bought at some women's bookstore that had its picture of like, hi, my name is Morning Star Bulldozer. Somebody with like shells in her hair and big boots. So we would say, and we came up with things like Raging Moss. Oh yeah, there were the plant names. There was like sage, and there was comfrey, and no, I don't remember all of them. Willow, sure. Oh. Dolphins. There were several dolphins, and there were several phoenixes. Yeah. Nobody was like Crescent Wrench.
There was Microwave.
Strawberry. A lot of us went through a lot of names, but yeah. But that wasn't limited to the peace camp. But there was quite a current of that at the peace camp, and then like witchy names, and then part of it was associated with at the peace camp women who came to do actions who wanted to give a pseudonym for when they were being arrested. Now, a lot of times they would change those up. One year there was like, a dozen Barbara Bushes. There was all those Jane Does, but there was also like one Halloween action that they all chose witch names, and there was like Glenda North, as in Good Witch of the, and, there were several like, Morgan, Caradwin, Hecate, all those.
It was a fun way to do things.
Yeah, it was. Well, because you'd leave all your identifying information somewhere else, back at the land, and you'd go in and you'd say, yes. Well, now it would be like, yes, I'm Condoleezza Rice.
Right. Did you ever take CP training?
No, I didn't. When I became aware of and involved with the action stuff that was going on, I really tended to play support roles. I was afraid of being arrested, and I didn't think I could climb a fence, and I wasn't ready to do that, but I did play support roles. I drove the escape car. I drove women up, and I cooked food. I did other things, but I didn't do the direct actions myself. I wrote songs about them. I sang, and I kept the troops entertained. Right. It was more of my role, really, was social and musical, and I did a lot of food stuff, and I still do that, actually. I still like that role. It's not that I don't want to do the work, but there's some things I was afraid to do the actions. I think I got that gradually over my first year. Over my first year of involvement there. By the next summer, I got it, and I was able to talk the talk. I mean, there was some of that too. It was just like, you want to be cool like those peace camp women. You have to learn how to talk the talk.
Walk the walk, talk the talk.
I was better at talking the talk. So I really think that the first summer my involvement was more social than anything. And I was, hearing all these great songs, and I was meeting all these great women, and we were going skinny dipping in the lake, and we were sitting around campfires, and I don't know if that we did a sweat lodge that summer, might have, but if we didn't do it that summer, we did it the following summer. I mean, I was learning so much so fast. It's hard for me to even remember myself before that, but part of it was that I was really coming of age myself, as an adult. And these experiences were really formative for me. I mean, I really became who I became in my life. My values and the things that are important to me are very much, were transformed by my time there. And this was just the beginning of it. I mean, and so in many ways, it went on in many ways. So throughout that year, I mean, the summer was always very busy. The summer was very busy, lots of women coming and going. It calmed down in the winter. And there were some women living there. I don't remember exactly who. I remember some of whom we were talking about that earlier. Sarah was there and Val was there, I'm pretty sure. And there were some other women there. I don't remember exactly who was there, but that'll all get reconstructed with other stories. But I did do some support to them because I was in town. I had a shower. I was, could bring stuff from the co-op. I could get there easily. I was interested in spending time there. So, I would often on the weekends come and, bring stuff, or, someone would come into town and, get a shower and maybe crash at my place, if they wanted to do something in town, or, so I became like one of the Ithaca connections. And by the next summer, I had been around as long as anyone. So, how things happened there. So many women just came to visit that anybody who'd been there more than once was like an institution already. Once you know where the book is for how to operate the wood stove, you're in, But, I can't even underestimate how much I learned. And how much I was starting to be exposed to the range of things that women could do. That was like, we're going to do this ourselves. So if we need to learn how to do the electrical work, we'll learn how to do it. If we need to learn how to build something, we'll learn how to build it. If we need to learn how to do some legal process, we'll learn how to do it. Like, I had been, in some ways, I had grown up in a very kind of humanistic household where the idea was that you can kind of do or be anything you want. But the reality was that I saw women's roles as circumscribed as anyone else. I mean, my mother was a doctor at a time that women weren't doctors, so I did have a sense of possibilities from her. But I also know how unhappy she was a lot. But that's just because of her personality and some of the trade-offs that she had to make in her life. So it's not that I, came from the whole, Beaver Cleaver kind of scene, but being around the peace camp let me see so many more possibilities for women, choices for women to make in their lives. Meanwhile, I was a graduate student in Cornell and trying to figure out my professional path. The longer I spent and the more time I spent in and around the peace camp, the harder it was for me to be in school, because the more I questioned everything. I mean, I always questioned to some degree, but I began to really see how the women faculty were treated differently, and how hard they had to work to get the same stuff the men had, and then how they then ended up kind of exploiting the students and backbiting each other, and how destructive that was. And I understood that as a product of sexism, and it was harder and harder for me to see myself as pursuing a career in that environment, and so much of it I became aware of was not really about expanding knowledge, but was really about expanding individuals' careers. And I mean, and part of it was just getting exposed to the like high-powered academic research academic machine that I didn't realize was what I had signed up for, and I didn't want it. And the more feminist criticism I had at my fingertips, the harder it was for me to stomach. And then I happened to have a woman advisor who was like the embodiment of all of that, and it was really damaging to me to be in that relationship. Eventually I left, but so the more and more I was at the camp, the harder and harder that was for me. It really changed my life. In the summer of '89, I met Elliot at the Peace Camp. She had come there. She came there kind of in the middle of the summer, I think. Maybe even towards the end. Maybe it was in July sometime. I don't remember exactly. Don't think she was there for July 4th that year, but she would remember that better than I do. And she, like, maybe it was earlier in the summer, because nobody was there no one was there when she and Mari showed up. Like, they showed up and they were like, okay, now what? There's nobody here. And like, I was one of the people listed as a local contact. So, I mean, I don't think I was the only one they called, but they were like, what do we do? Where do we, and somebody told them, it might have been me. There's a book about, there's the notebook, it should be on the wood stove. It tells you where things are and how things work, and you're it. Go. I'll be up on the weekend. But there was a lot of activity that summer as well, with women coming and going of all sorts and stripes. And Elliot was there with Mari, but they were non-monogamous. It was just my first encounter with that, and I didn't know any. I mean, it was interesting because Elliot says, it's funny because Elliot says she was kind of drawn to me right away because she had remembered seeing me at the Triangle Campfire at Michigan the summer before, and she was kind of attracted to me. And she got there, she came with Mari. I was assuming like they were together, and it didn't even occur to me to like start anything. But then she was flirting with me wildly, and I was kind of clueless. It's funny how we kind of talk about that summer, and she says, people say, well, kind of who made the first move? And she said, well, I kind of tricked Otter into doing that. So, well, kind of Otter did, but I kind of manipulated the situation. She had. But I was kind of clueless until I wasn't. But then I didn't know how to deal with that with Mari, and what does non-monogamy mean anyway, and is this going to be okay, and I don't want to cause problems in your relationship. And Elliot assured me, oh no, we're not monogamous, this is fine, we do this all the time. I'm like, I thought I was just not cool enough to be non-monogamous. It was too cool for me. And Elliot was, being very hip and kind of, glib about it. I mean, it turned out that they had all sorts of shit they needed to work out that they were not working out. And I was, and her involvement with me was in part a mechanism for that avoidance. And, and then Mari blamed me for everything because it was easier than her dealing with whatever was going on with her and Elliot. And that was like a long legacy of Mari hating my guts, which eventually changed over many years. But I was just gaga, once that started up. And both of us were, and then she went back to Minnesota, and we had this long distance thing where we sent all sorts of really outrageous things to each other in the mail. And so we had this kind of postal courtship, and her goal was to send me things to my mailbox at school that would embarrass me in front of my peers, that would make me blush, and that was her mission.
Did it was fun. Succeed?
Oh, many times. Many times. And then she came back out that winter to visit me in Ithaca, She came out on the train. Anyway, and then the whole story of our relationship goes off in a direction, but not totally in a separate direction, because our connection started with the peace camp, and for many, many years of our, actually until about, we figured out it must have been about 98, we were very involved with the peace camp, and then the peace land and the transition. So the next summer, so we met in 89. In 1990, she arranged to do her she was a master's student in women's studies at Mankato, and she had to do some kind of applied, practicum kind of thing. So she arranged to spend the summer at the camp, which was really just basically a way of getting credit for shacking up with me for the summer. So she was officially living at the peace camp and doing her practicum or internship or whatever it was, but. So we're going back and forth between living in the dot room and my place in town, and we'd go back and forth, mostly, depending on my schedule, and she would stay up. Anyway, was that summer. So that was probably the summer I spent the most time there. I mean, because we were together all the time, and we were doing a lot of stuff, and that, I think, was Transform or Die. I mean, Elliot came there as a radical lesbian separatist. She was way too cool for me. And honestly, my relationship with her very much deepened my analysis, because, as you know, she's brilliant, and she is so articulate about it, and she's also quite radical, and at the time she was even more so. As a separatist, and with a very keen critique of heteropatriarchy and all of its structures and implications. Remember the paper about how language is used in the military to objectify the enemy, and so they're casualties, they're not dead people, and they're targets, they're not villages, and they're, it's like all the language of, there was somebody who had done a dissertation or some master's thesis or something, and it was there. The copy of it was there, and I remember reading it and talking about it and gaining, all of a sudden, a much deeper understanding. And then women would talk casually about, how, all the other kinds of ways that sexism is a kind of inherent part of militarism, and the connections between, ecological exploitation and exploitation of women's lives, and violence against women and violence against the earth, and how that's all connected to the whole militarist agenda and mindset and strategy. And women would talk about that so casually, but the connections were so strong. It's kind of like, once you start seeing it that way, you can't not see it that way anymore. You can't not see it. You can't stop knowing it. Or I can't stop knowing it. I mean, I guess some people do, but it's like, the emperor has no clothes, and once you know that, it's like you can't ever pretend like the emperor isn't butt naked anymore. And to me, kind of the whole academic system was part of that emperor. That's part of why I had to leave it. It became apparent for what it was. I mean, it's not that there aren't good things that happen, but also a lot of bad. But I learned a lot. I remember a conversation I had with Bird, who had been in the military, stationed at Seneca Army Depot, and had seen the women doing these protests, and who had been drawn to that, probably mostly because she could see there were lesbians, and she was too, and it was very isolating for her in the military. But gradually she also started seeing the kind of peace points of it all, and recognizing what she was doing as somebody in the military, and all of that kind of came together for her, and she left the military, and she came to live at the peace camp. And we were like, okay, one down. How many to go? She was a strange character, but she was really different from me. Her life experiences had been so different from me. And I remember having a conversation with her about abuse. And she had been, kind of routinely beaten and abused physically. And I had been never abused physically or sexually, to my knowledge. To this day, not to my knowledge, so I'm pretty sure not. But I had been psychologically abused. I had been emotionally abused and manipulated in other ways. And I remember a conversation I had with her about that, and she said, "Oh, I'd much rather be beaten. Because, at least you know where the fist is, and then it goes away. Like, it's clear." She was like, I would, not that anybody should have to deal with any of this, but she said, I would think that psychological abuse would be much worse. I mean, as if there wasn't psychological abuse accompanying the physical abuse she endured. And I was thinking just the opposite. I'm like, at least I wasn't hurt. And that was a really deep moment of understanding these differences and connections. And I was very fond of Bird. She was very strange, but she was very, very, she was so sincere and sweet in her way. I don't mean in a sugary way. I mean, there was a real loving person at the center of all of this, kind of like, she had been in the military. She had a lot of that affect and clothing, like the appearance and the demeanor and the habits of that. I mean, that's just a perfect example of how much outside of my world. I didn't know anybody who had ever been in or considered being in the military. It was like you would never do that. In the world I grew up in. I mean, partly because I was kind of Jewish and liberal and, intellectual and all of that stuff, but it was off my map of the world. I mean, I met many women at the peace camp who had been in the military at one time or another, and have had all sorts of various experiences of that. But she was, what an incredible thing to do that she did. What an incredible and brave thing to do. She also had beautiful tattoos, some of which she had designed herself. So, but in terms of the trajectory of the peace camp
tell
timeline,
us your understanding of
Transform or Die. Well, the thing is that the peace camp as open women's land had some amazing qualities. I mean, that was why there could be any woman coming at any time, and the incredible variety of women that would come, and it was just, you could just come and be there, and then once you were there, you were part of the structure and governance of the place, which, the openness of it had an incredible beauty, but it also had a lot of pitfalls. One of the biggest problems of that was there was no continuity of decision making. There was none. So whatever decisions got made by whatever group of women were there, and if some other group of women had made an opposite decision 2 months prior, well, then the policy just got changed. Well, it was like revolving door policy. I mean, it was like whoever had campaigned well enough to get enough women on their side of the smoking issue or the meat issue or the, whatever the issue of the day was. And it was, but also it wasn't like, we were getting to the point where we could see that it wasn't sustainable. The numbers were dwindling in terms of the numbers of participation. We were getting closer and closer to the loan being paid back by donations from women who would send in donations, and they would be paid back that loan. And my sense of Transform or Die was the sense that this isn't sustainable in the form that it's in. That, like, the house was becoming more and more decrepit. There were fewer and fewer women to do the work. There were more and more problems with the land being open, that women were coming there who had no other place to be. And as much as we wanted there to be places for those women, it was very isolated. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There were no jobs, and even fewer jobs for peace camp dykes, because the local climate was still pretty suspicious of the women who were there, and not, with a few exceptions clearly in the community, but there weren't jobs to be had for anybody in that community, really. So if you had no money, which if somebody was desperate and needed a place to be, she usually had almost no money. You had no way, once you got there, you had no way of taking care of yourself. You had no way of getting out of there. And whoever was there was saddled with the responsibility of taking care of whoever turned up with whatever needs they had, sometimes which were way beyond the capability of anybody who was there. And certainly, the women who were there had not signed up for that job. And that was an increasing problem as the numbers dwindled. The proportion of the women who were there to do activism versus the proportion of the women who were there because they had nowhere else to be, or they needed something, or they were hungry for something they thought they would find at the peace camp, was really becoming unmanageable, undoable, and we were becoming aware that it was contributing to the harm of these women. That there were women who, it wasn't a responsible thing. It wasn't woman loving to allow them to come there with nothing, have nothing to offer them, have no way to take care of them, and to not say, we really need to take you out of here and find some place where you can actually receive the care you need. And the idea of transform or die was, it's time for this to change. That if we're going to decide what we're going to do with this, had the loan just been completed being paid, or was that a little bit later? It was close though. We were honing in on that if we hadn't actually accomplished it, and we were recognizing that there was a need for an infusion of some new energy or new direction, or a decision to say this is done. The women who had stayed after 83 had been a bigger group who were living on the land, and that had gradually dwindled, and it was becoming more and more difficult. Also, the whole political climate was changing, and the zapping was happening, and that was also a major issue in terms of the ability of women to be living there on a long-term basis. But I think also the political climate and the economic climate of the country was changing. It was harder for women to dedicate so much of their lives to this activism. We're in the Reagan years, and making a living was harder, and the issues were changing. Like the nukes that had been a flashpoint of activism for a lot of people in the 80s. That issue became less prevalent, and it's not that it went away, and there was still militarism and everything else, but it wasn't as much the hot issue, so it wasn't drawing activists. But also I think there were fewer activists who could devote themselves to it. It just, things were changing. I don't think that was, it was always, you have to understand it all in the historical context it's in. Things continued to change and shift. And, economics were harder, and it was harder for women to be able to, just sustain their lives. So it was harder to have extra resources, whether that's time or money, to give to, to give to an activist effort. But I do think that there were women in communities all over the place who were really glad it was happening, and felt like the women who were doing that work were carrying something important forward. But it was, the mailing list was dwindling because so many returns and people move and you don't know where they go, and so the mailing list was dwindling. A number of women active was dwindling. Most importantly, the involvement of the local women was dwindling. And I think, there was always some criticism from remote places that was kind of like, what are you still doing there? What's happening? what is this money sustaining? I mean, there were actions that were ongoing. There were demonstrations at the gate. There were women who'd go over the fence. There was, but you know, the thing is that in the absence of the big move, the question, which was a legitimate question, was, what are you still doing this for? And there was always a sense that, well, but the depot is still here and militarism still exists and we're just still doing it because we believe this. But the legitimate question was, okay, but what impact is this having? You know, like, other than basically creating a nuisance for the Army depot. Like, there's no press coverage, there's no, you know, it was like, it was fun for us to do. But the question was, is this effective political action? And I think that there was a sense that there was more going on at the camp than political action. There was this culture being created that where we were trying to embody and enact all of these interconnected ideas about you know, eliminating, eradicating sexism in the various ways that it's expressed, and the empowerment of women, and, you know, developing new ways of being with each other that wasn't about power over, but was about power with and power to. That there was a growing awareness that there was more to the peace camp than the political actions. But that was really clear to those of us who were there. But it was less clear to the women who were supporting it from a distance. That part of what was being created was an experiment in embodying these new values and living the politics.
Could that process happen without the support of these other people?
Well, at the time, probably not, because we were really reliant upon the financial support to continue, just to continue, you know, pay taxes, pay off this loan, pay for wood, heating, you know, wood to heat the place, you know, the utility bills. I mean, the women who were there contributed what they could. But these were women who were, the women who were living there were women who were, you know, giving up their day jobs and giving up their, you know, they didn't have much when they were living there. Because for the most part, they weren't working, because there were no jobs right there, and it was hard to find, you know, commute to work, and they were basically deciding to live this life for a while, and it wasn't a glamorous life, but it was also one that really relied on a broader support, you know, of me bringing up a couple bags of groceries and someone else saying, well, I'll buy a cord of wood, and someone else saying, you know, I'll come help split that wood, and someone else, I mean, you know, so there was an interest in continuing what was happening. But I think that the thing about Transform or Die was partly about, like, that decision, the decision of what this is going to be into the future. If we're going to create something that's sustainable, we need the involvement and the buy-in and the agreement, or at least first of all, nobody knew what the right answer was. So we definitely knew that we needed a process that was going to involve broader wisdom. That wasn't just going to be decided by the women who were there. Neither was it just going to be decided by women at a distance who were going to say, you know, well, I'm taking my money and going home. Like, that it needed to be a decision that involved as many of the women in various roles as possible, because we didn't really know what was going to emerge. There were a lot of ideas being tossed around. But, you know, some were in favor of saying, like, what this was meant to be is over. And, you know, like, we can enact these values in our lives in the world some other place. We don't need to be on this piece of land next to, in the middle of nowhere, a mile away from an army depot where we're getting zapped in order to do that. But there were others who said, we have this tremendous resource of this land. This is a precious, precious commodity. How many pieces of land are dedicated to women in the world? And that we should not squander this. that we should find a way to make use of this in a way that furthers the vision and the spirit that was originally founded in. And there were many other currents, but those I think were the kind of main themes.
And what was your personal?
Well, I was very connected to the land at that time, and I knew that I was one of the people who had the energy to continue something. I was close, and then even when we moved away, I wanted to be connected and I wanted to be part of it. And I had been for the past couple of years, and a lot of the women who were saying don't do this anymore had been away for quite some time, and they were no longer connected in the same way. And also they had the perspectives that you get when you're living in the, other world, of kind of what priorities should be or ought to, it's like your perspective on those things are different when you're like living in a kind of separate community that's kind of separated from that, versus when you're living in a city where you're kind of encountering all of these conflicting priorities all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of easier to say, I know we're just going to do this. So I was on the side of continuing something on the land. And there were women who, like Elliot was talking about Cindy, Cindy really, she came to the place where she said, I can't be one of the people who does this work, but now I can see there are women who do want to do this work, and I can get out of the way and allow that to happen. And there were some women who weren't as principled and were just, arguing for, in a more theoretical way. Cindy was really coming from a deep place of like, what can I support? What do I believe? And what can I do? And what should I do with that? But there were all stripes there, and people who, had really strong opinions and people who had really no opinions, and it was a really complicated set of decisions to make. But ultimately, there was a decision in favor of ending the peace camp as it was, as open women's land, because part of the difficulties we had been having in making something sustainable there was the completely open nature of it. Even though that freedom was also very valued, it opened us up to it made us very vulnerable to anyone who breezed in, and anyone who breezed in, whether they knew everything or nothing, could block consensus and could change policy and could implement her agenda, whatever it was, whether it was intentional or not, and undermine all of the cumulative work that had gone up to that point. And that was really damaging, like on an ongoing basis. That we couldn't get anywhere. We just couldn't get anywhere. So what I recall is that, for me, that was always a big piece of, if we're going to move forward as an intent, we wanted to create an intentional community, intentional women's community, dedicated to the embodiment of these values that had come out of the political action and been born of the earlier years of the peace camp. And because we believed in it, and I still do in many ways. So we had to figure out how to make it go from open women's land, where anyone could come and anyone could be for as long as she wanted, with very, very few rules and hardly any way to enforce them. And the governance structure was basically anyone who was there, and to change that to something we thought would be more sustainable. And how to make that be an intentional community, and how to build intentional community. And then gradually over, I think that at Transform or Die, Hershey asked me what happened at Transform or Die, and the decision was made to move in that direction. But then then we formed a group of women who said we would be part of that. And then we had to figure out how to do it. I mean, we